Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a Permaculture podcast live stream. Yeah, it's nice to be back and on air again after taking a break and not being around. It was really helpful and useful to take some time to get the schedule for the show together and do some of the work that was needed to kind of prepare for the 12th year of the Permaculture podcast and deciding when to air live streams so that I can, make sure that there's something that are easy to create over and over again and not necessarily be working on them over the weekends and things like that. So for live streams, I'll be having these kind of mid afternoon, mid weeks once a month, and then another in the evening as well to kind of spread this across time zones and make these accessible to everyone around. And yeah, so thank you for coming today, being a part of this, and checking out the video. In addition to the live streams, I'm also looking at 45 long format interviews this year and using that then to structure in some downtime. And so that's kind of what I wanted to cover today. Was a bit of a catch up. I know that not everyone subscribes to Patreon, where I post a lot of the regular updates about what's going on. And also, as you catch different episodes and tune in here and there, that you probably catch bits and pieces of what's up and what's going on, but not necessarily everything that's happening. And that's where these live streams kind of work as a catch-all then to engage in checking up and catching up on what's going on and covering everything else that I don't always get to in the regular episodes. And so as you're listening today, if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat, or if I mention anything that you have a comment on, let me know as well. But yeah, as we're heading into the fall, it's been an interesting time reaching out to a large number of guests to help prepare the end of the year and move into 2022. And I've got a bunch of things lined up for later in the year. So up next will be Vicky Hurd, author of Rebugging the Planet, who joined me to talk about what we can do to be both aware of the impacts of what we have on the environment and how that affects insects, and then what we can do about that to begin making a difference. From there, with that book, I'm also giving away 2 copies of Rebugging the Planet, and those details will be in the episode that comes out on October 22nd for patrons and October 25th everywhere else. So listen to that episode, and in the end you'll hear of course, you just email me with your entry, but what subject to use in order to get a copy of that. Just a really fun interview. Absolutely fantastic to sit down with Vicky and have that conversation, and I'm delighted to share it with you. From there, I'll be taking off the following week. My birthday is celebrated on Halloween, and I always like to kind of take that time to enjoy. But if you do want to get in touch, if you're on Patreon, I'll still be posting a weekly update, and the Forest Wisdom Service post or Forest Wisdom Council post will go up on Monday as well for participants at that level, so we can continue our dialogue. But yeah, and otherwise, if you want to get in touch, of course, phone, email, text, drop something in the post. If you've listened to the show for a while, you likely have my contact information, so feel free to drop me any questions or comments you have there as well, so we can start your dialogue. From there, if you, as I say, haven't checked in or been aware of some of the things, I'm really trying to do a narrow focus for the 12th year of the show and kind of dive into these interviews and experiment with some different ways of producing and sharing content with you. So I've got a series coming up that will air, hopefully, if all goes well, just through November, which is on permaculture and land access, which is a series of interviews with some folks discussing, yeah, what does permaculture look like in cityscapes and the urban environment for people who don't necessarily have a lot of land? What are the impacts of agriculture and agriculture policy on our practices and the choices we can make as consumers? Because there's a lot of systemic pieces that impact what we're able to do. And that's going to be a 7-part series, with the first episode kind of being an introduction to each of the guests and where they come from and their perspective. And then from there, 4 individual episodes with each of them sharing their thoughts. So that'll get episodes 1 through 5 before dropping into an episode that shares their specific thoughts on land access and what we can do as permaculture practitioners and others to change the state of land access for people. And that with those varied guests, they each have different ideas about what that could look like and how we can engage to make that kind of a difference. And then the final episode is just kind of a recap to encapsulate some of the lessons that were shared and ideas that they presented to us, as well as a long list of resources and places to go to connect with what they shared, and to move, what would normally be the resources section of an individual episode into a final conversation with some additional comments from myself on what you might want to look at or consider, as well as organizations that stand out to me as ones to get involved in, with the ideas that come through with my personal worldview when it comes to both grassroots, ground up mutual aid type organizations and involvement. What can we do to create our own seed sharing organizations or local seed banks, things like that, as well as some of the organizations then that might tie many of those ideas together for us in, kind of this rounded out conversation that takes all of their wisdom then and encapsulates it with some of my ideas so that they can shine during those interviews, and then kind of coming back to add to that space. So that's one series then that'll, as I say, will run through November. December will be more of our traditional kind of conversations and the long format interviews. And then moving into 2022, in December, I'm looking at beginning to record interviews for a series on radical self-care. Everything from, movement and exercise to, what are some of the emerging areas of interest when it comes to herbal medicine or things like cannabis or psilocybin containing mushrooms, when it comes to our self-care. And that it's, self-care that becomes a part of not only interventions that we might participate in that are short-term to get us through a crisis or help to transform our thoughts or worldviews, but also then, what are the things that we can do that are active long-term in our lives so that self-care is not, the kinds of things that you see on a supermarket shelf about, a spa treatment or taking a day or two off for ourselves, or like that mental health day. Though I do admit I understand how those can be important and valuable, but something more holistic that then we can apply the permaculture framework to these different ideas to bring it into our lives as part of our regular practices. And so that's something that I'm really interested in, and also, like I say, continuing to explore this idea of like series of conversations. Other content that kind of fits in with this, I'm sat down recently with Dan Palmer, one of my colleagues who produces the blog and podcast Making Permaculture Stronger, and we had just a kind of conversation about what was arising in both of us, and reflected off of one another for about 45 minutes to an hour. And so that will be out sometime here in the next few months, probably December or January, where it's just kind of two colleagues talking about these ideas. And what we wound up getting into were design process and authentic education, and the spaces that we are coming from when we look at permaculture, and some of the things that guests on the show have shared over the years, like Dave Jackie talking about, how he didn't learn design in his permaculture design course, but later came to it when he was studying landscape architecture, or the idea that we're given, these ethics and principles that are really valuable as permaculture practitioners, but there's kind of this break between the high order kind of philosophical thinking and then what gets us from there to the on the ground techniques, and what does it mean to create a permaculture design, and then what does it even mean to be a designer. And as we work through those ideas, we also kind of touch on the role of education and what the permaculture design course might look like if we pare it down so it's kind of a skeleton to hang ideas on that then makes it more accessible to others, and how we deliver that content, and what it means to deliver that content to folks, and how, yeah, just some kind-hearted critiques of where we started and where we are and where we might want to go. And I'm really thankful to Dan for wanting to sit down and have that conversation with me, because it was just really enjoyable to sit with a colleague and discuss those kinds of things. He and I also as part of that, are working on these different ideas between maybe doing some short form content for our shows, where we just look at a single question or idea and then both kind of respond to that question or idea, answer it together, and then that's it, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and that's an episode. And I'll be integrating some of those in addition to the long form episodes and the interviews. And we'll be looking for your feedback to know what you would like us to do if we are to record more pieces like that. And also just the feedback, does answering a single question in a short form work for you as well? Or would you prefer if we sat down and recorded 4 or 5 responses to questions, addressing several questions in one go for an episode like that, and stay with the longer format material. But yeah, those are some things to look forward to in December and early next year. In addition to that, I'm also working on a series with Rosemary Morrow to look at her lifetime and legacy as a permaculture teacher and practitioner, with all the places that she's been and all the work that she's done, and share that with the world. As I've said in some episodes of the show and reflected on in the piece on like the books that I recommend people read to get started in permaculture, her work has been incredibly influential on me, and is really the place that I recommend most folks begin once they've gotten through some of the philosophical frameworks of having read something like Masanobu Fukuoka's The One Straw Revolution, or Donella Meadows' Thinking in Systems. Rosemary's the next person who I recommend for everybody. And she's working on a new book with Meliadora Publishing, which you'll be able to order through the Permaculture Principles website, which is Earth Restorer's Guide to Permaculture, which is a new book that builds upon the bones of her work of Earth Restorer, or what is it? It's Earth User's Guide to Permaculture. Sorry for that blank there, but that's supposed to be this magnificent expanded work. It's like 50% bigger than the others. I say supposed to be. I've been able to see some early drafts of the manuscript, and it's something that I'm super excited for people to see and get their hands on when it comes out. And yeah, to have these conversations with Rosemary. And we've already recorded more than an hour of material for that. We actually have another recording session tonight, um, and I don't know how long we'll be talking. Whether it'll be another hour, hour and a half, or maybe we'll go for a couple of hours. But it's really enjoyable to be having these conversations with someone who's been my hero, and yeah, be able to get this voice that has been so important to me. And as I've learned over the past several months as we've been organizing and putting together this series, she's someone who's had a huge impact on so many people around the world. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that. But also, if you've listened to the most recent interview with Chantry Casera, the public release, I talk in there some about the fall fundraiser, and that the money that we raise during that kind of helps to set the scope of what this series with Rosemary looks like, and who else we can include, and kind of how big it becomes. I'm sure that I will release at least 4 episodes with Rosemary. With how things are going, because of her preference, they'll likely be a little bit shorter than my usual 40 to 45-minute interview, but still fairly substantial in content and conversation. But what I'd really like to do is be able to include more of those voices of people who she's worked with over the years and has influenced, and whose lives she's changed. But it's just, the production that goes on behind the scenes to make that work is quite a bit. And yeah, so that series with Rosemary is also in addition to the normal episodes that come out for the show. From there, in 2022, getting back into January, I'll be returning to offering some classes and things, and I'm looking forward to those. Also working on a retreat for September of 2022 outside of Asheville, North Carolina, as kind of a 5-day event for some of us to get together and go through what I'm currently kind of thinking of as the storyteller's initiation, which takes a lot of the ideas that I've developed over storytelling for personal transformation, storytelling for business, and storytelling for design, and bringing them together to kind of create a modern oral storytelling tradition with some folks, and see where that leads us and what develops in a shared co-creative space. But yeah, that's early September of 2022. We're looking at that. So that kind of catches you up on where everything is at the moment with the show and a bunch of what I'm working on. I see there are several of you here on the stream. Now that I've spent about 20 minutes on this, if you have any questions or anything you'd like to drop into the chat, please feel free, and we can get into a discussion together. If not, though, that's totally okay. I've got a couple more things here that I want to touch on and cover when it comes to some books that have shown up lately that I really recommend for folks to check out. As always, there's so much great material that's out there right now that I can't always have every author on the show for an interview or necessarily review all of their books on the show. But, here in this space is where I just like to touch on all of this kind of hodgepodge of stuff I don't get to elsewhere. So the first is, I recently had the interview with Gigi Berardi about her book Food Wise, which was also the name of that episode. If you haven't already, if you heard that interview and you'd like a copy of this book, I am doing a giveaway for it. Just drop me an email with the subject Food Wise to enter, and I'll be picking someone for that here in about a week or two, randomly, for who will receive this. I do think it's just a fabulous book on different ways to approach our interaction with the food system. As more and more of us are landless or live in urban environments where the ability to forage or grow a large portion of our calories, as we continue to make that transition, books like this are just really important on getting us to think differently and reframe the way that we participate in our food system. It was one of the things that really got my mind thinking differently about permaculture and the space we inhabit. Toby Hemingway's Permaculture, the Permaculture City, and where he talked about in there that, if you can't grow your own food, then who can you buy it from? If you aren't in a space where the calories you're able to produce make a huge impact on your life and lifestyle, well, what are other things that you can do that make a difference? How can we create resilience and sustainability in our lives even if we don't grow? Keeping a well-stocked food pantry and some extra things on hand to eat. Or if, as we've learned through this pandemic, with the fluctuation of food prices and what are or haven't been available, the way that can change our diet, and how not panic buying, but preparing and putting a little away can have a huge difference. And Gigi looks at all of that and so much more in Food Wise. And yeah, I really like that book just quite a lot. As I mentioned earlier, there's Vicky Hurd's Rebugging the Planet. The subtitle there is The Remarkable Things That Insects and Other Invertebrates Do and Why We Need to Love Them More. I love this book and the conversation I had with Vicky in ways that are almost hard to describe. It is not only full of beautiful, well-written chapters that give us, the research and ideas that make a difference for insects in our environment, but also all kinds of just quick little bullet points and boxes of how we can engage with the different ideas and get involved. It's also a book that I think for anybody who has kids or is interested in children and the environment, that this book, Rebugging the Planet by Vicky Hurd, is a great piece to explore with, those 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, a little bit older children or middle schoolers on what we can do. And then also, as an environmental educator and parent myself, I think about just spending some time in the environment around us and, go on bug hunts. Not to eliminate them, but to find them and to see them and know what insects are around us. A big influence for me were my children, and because of their love of slugs and caterpillars, butterflies and bees, and it helped me get over some of my own concerns about bugs and bug phobia. And in particular, I spent a lot of time arachnophobic in my life, but seeing my children's love and the world through their eyes again, taking my camera out and taking pictures was just a beautiful thing. And yeah, I love the encouragement from Vicky, and I recommend visiting her website. If I remember, it's rebuggingtheplanet.org. She has some beautiful pictures from her garden and some of the bugs that she's found there on her website. And you can learn more about her and what she's doing. Just fantastic person, wonderful interview, great book. Another one that showed up on my radar, and I'd love to interview him, but it wouldn't be in coordination with the book because the book hits the streets here in just over a week on October 29th. And yeah, my interview schedule is full through 2022 at this point, but is Ben Raskin and the Wood Chip Handbook. As he says here, a complete guide for farmers, gardeners, and landscapers. For all the things that we talk about being able to use mulch and wood chips for covering our garden, for drowning out weeds, for breaking up the rainfall to make that water more accessible and get it into the ground. You know, Ben covers so much of how that works and why it works and what to look for and, you know, where to get wood chips from so that we can, you know, mulch our growing beds, build and capture carbon in the soil, which of course is so important right now. The soil really is one of the I don't want to say untapped resources because I don't like thinking of the world as a resource in that way, but as I lack the language in the moment, it's just, yeah, being able to store water and carbon in the ground. And it's something that as permaculture practitioners we can do in a variety of ways that are pretty straightforward and easy, as part of our practices in the landscape and on the ground. Plus, he also talks about, you know, raising mushrooms in wood chips, which is something, you know, I was trying at least to raise King Stropharia in my garden paths, which is something that you can do, and it's just awesome. And with the more that municipalities are working on their street tree programs and things, there's tons of ways that we can get wood chips inexpensively and use them in the garden. And this is a great companion if you're someone who's doing that already, if it's something that you want to be talking with folks about in your permaculture design practice. Yeah, Ben just gives us a lot of the information that we need to make sense of that and break down the numbers and the difference it can make for ourselves and others. As I say, that comes out here October 29th is the sale date. It is $24.95 in the US or 20 Great British Pounds if you're in the UK, and comes from friends of the show and longtime allies Chelsea Green Publishing. The last book that I have that showed up recently that is absolutely fabulous and quite a tome, I got to show this to you edge on. And it's just super dense at just under 500 pages, is Robert Corex Sustainable Food Gardens. I've had Robert on the show years ago. I love his work and his writing. Super accessible, easy to read, lots of great diagrams, tons of information, and he's knocked it out of the park again with Sustainable Food Gardens as he looks at the myths and solutions of how to grow food in a way that is in alignment with permaculture and our practices. And it's, man, it is just this beautiful, beautiful book. Tons of great pictures and diagrams, and yeah, just absolutely lovely. And though the retail on this is $69.95, available directly through Robert, though I believe it's also being distributed by Chelsea Green, you can also buy it directly from Robert right now, via his website. If you look up Metamorphic Press or Robert Couric, Kourik, I'm sure you'll be able to find him and pick up a copy right now through, I think it's early January. That's on sale for $50, so you can get it at a bit of a discount. But yeah, just another wonderful one to add to your collection and be able to look at a specific issue or problem as a permaculture designer. One of the conversations that I had with Dan Palmer recently was about how broad permaculture often can be, and all of the different resources that are available to us, and the conversations we might want to have with our clients or people who are interested in permaculture education, and the resources that we want to point them towards. And for anybody who's looking at that gardening side, you know, Gaia's Garden by the amazing late Toby Hemingway, man, I miss him so much. Or something like Robert Corrick's Sustainable Food Gardens. Great kind of things to share with folks in our lives, to point them to. If you, yeah, And if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. That covers kind of everything that I had today, unless you want to continue the conversation. But otherwise, another one of these I think it's 2 weeks in the evening. As I say, the next episode of the show will be out on October tomorrow, October 22nd for patrons, or Monday the 25th everywhere else, which is that conversation with Vicky Hurd. And yeah, we'll continue these live streams and all of this material and the Permaculture podcast throughout 2022 and see where things go from here. And of course, as always, if you'd like to, you can get involved by becoming a member of the Permaculture Patreon community at patreon.com/permaculturepodcast. If you've listened to the show for a while, feel free to use any of my contact information to get in touch. And of course, we can always continue this conversation off air and examine what you're personally experiencing and, your search for solutions through meandering, which you can find out more about that at thepermaculturepodcast.com/meandering, or schedule a conversation with me just by going to calendly.com/permaculture. And you can click there, check out my schedule, find a time that is convenient for you, and we can sit down and talk one-on-one about what you're going through and working on. But yeah, thank you all for joining me live today. Thank you to everyone who catches this as a replay. I know you hear this a lot, I'm sure, with YouTube, but as I understand, their algorithm does make a difference. So if you enjoy this, please like the video, subscribe. What is it now? Click the bell for notifications or whatever. But yeah, thank you for joining me for this today, and I'll catch you again soon. So take care and have a great rest of your day.